On Christmas Day, 1996, 32-year-old Patty Vaughn left her home in Lavernia, Texas, and never came back. Her car was found 15 miles from her house, but her body was never discovered. The only thing that she left behind were bloodstains all around her house and 3 children, all who were playing in their house at the time and didn't notice she was gone until hours later. In 2001, the Merlin family was attending a small Christmas party in Denver. A Santa Claus was hired anonymously to come in and hand out presents to the children at the party. It was seen by many attending the party that the Santa Claus whispered something into one of the Merlin sons' ears when he was sitting on his lap. A few minutes after the Santa said his goodbyes and left the party, the young Merlin boy left the firehouse that was hosting the party as well, only to never be seen or heard from again. The anonymous Santa also disappeared without a trace. Tracy Mertens moved from Birmingham to Rochdale with her boyfriend Joey Cavagna and their 2 young children. On December 23rd, she went back to her old flat to fetch some things when 2 men came inside the flat and abducted her. The men took her to the town of Eaton, placed her on the steps in front of a church, and burned her alive. She managed to stay alive long enough to tell the story and kept repeating what the men were asking her, "Where is Joey?" before they set her on fire. Joey debunked ever having known anyone who would have done this to his family. 19-year-old Rhonda Hinton was murdered on December 22, 1981 after attending a company Christmas party. She died from someone firing a bullet that traveled through the trunk and driver's seat and then into her heart. What was never explained about Rhonda's murder was a mystery man who witnesses had spotted standing next to her car around the time of her death. Rhonda's parents also told the police she was acting strange just days before the murder occurred. During the 1960s and 70s, the city Warminster in England was known as a place where UFO sightings kept happening. However, the sightings were not initially flying objects, rather unexplained sounds. The most curious case was of Marjorie Bai, who was on her way home from a Christmas church service when she was knocked to the ground and paralyzed by the strange vibrating noises. She described the experience as being pinned down by the invisible fingers of sound. She never recovered. Jared Betterson and Susan Klingel lived in Dearborn, Michigan with their daughter Nicole. Soon after Nicole turned 2, they were in a car accident and Nicole's mother Susan passed away. Jared then remarried to a woman named Barbara with whom he decided to move, but never saying where to exactly to his family or his late wife's family. Ever since that move, Nicole was never seen again, and Jared and Barbara were only found after they both committed suicide 20 years later. The only thing left behind them was a note saying they were sorry for all they've done. In 2007, in a small town in Arkansas, there was an unknown man dressed as Santa Claus walking around town that left gifts on about 6 people's stoops. 5 of them were later revealed to be old useless toys and other junk, while Jamie Frester and her husband received a package containing a series of papers. Most of them consisted of nothing but old office papers dating back to the 80s and 90s, but there was one note that stood out due to its large writing. It said simply, "I'm sorry for whatever happens to your son." 2 years later, their 12-year-old son Chris was hit by a car while crossing the street on his bike and suffered fatal injuries. The car that hit him did not stop to help and was never identified. To this day, it was never learned who the mysterious Santa Claus was, or if that note was purely coincidental. 38-year-old Lockhart, Texas resident Latricia White was spending Christmas of 1994 with her boyfriend Lee Wackerhagen and his 9-year-old son Chance. Lee was supposed to drop off his son to his mother on Christmas Day, but decided to keep him for a few more days. A few days later, Lee's girlfriend Latricia was found dead in their apartment, and Lee and his son were never seen again. The police suspected Lee killed Latricia and ran, taking his son with him, but their suspicions were never confirmed, as Lee was never found. Everyone who celebrates Christmas knows the song A Visit from St. Nicholas, or better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. However, the origin of this song has a fair amount of mystery linked to it. For many years, no one knew who wrote it. A Visit from St. Nicholas was sent anonymously to the Sentinel, a newspaper in New York, and first published on December 23, 1823. It's still not established who wrote it, as several men came forward saying it was them, but literature experts were never really able to determine who was telling the truth. The original author was finally determined in 1837 when Clement Clarke Moore claimed authorship. These are 5 videos with unexplainable background stories. There is an unknown creature in England known as Messie by sewer maintenance. It was discovered during a regular maintenance survey. There had been previous reports of strange happenings in the sewers occurring on other routine maintenance jobs, however nothing as conclusive as this following piece of footage. Workers have been reporting hearing noises from within the tunnels for years. One worker even called the police as he thought someone was stuck in the pipes. The noises have been described as being almost human. One worker described the sounds as being similar to a woman coughing or choking violently. The water company manager has come out and said that several employees have reported sightings of some kind of animal in the sewers. He's reviewed the CCTV footage, and he himself stated that it certainly did not look like a typical sewer rat. It was assumed that the creature was feeding on fat deposits that have built up on the inside of the pipes. According to workers, the creature still remains unidentified to this day. On February 25, 2014, a nude male body washed ashore on a beach in England. The man was wearing only socks and one shoe, but the police made a strange discovery. A set of headphones were found in the man's mouth, as well as a rolled-up sock. The white headphones were looped around the back of the sock and were trailing out of his mouth. A number of items were found nearby, including a jacket, a wallet, and a photo of a young child. The victim was identified as 64-year-old Alan Geel, and the child in the photo was Alan when he was 2. Alan did have surviving family, however he was a loner, so suicide was considered a possibility. Alan had recently purchased a weighted training vest and ankle weights, which suggested that he may have been planning to drown himself. However, these weights were never found, and the unexplained injuries to Alan's chest and head meant foul play could not be ruled out. The day before his body was found, Alan had traveled from Waterbridge to Truro and was seen wandering through the area on CCTV footage. The most intriguing video showed him speaking with individuals at a bus station, but they were never identified. Alan was last photographed in Purenporth on February 24, 2014. The strangest detail from the CCTV footage showed Alan wearing a completely different jacket than the one found on the beach. The jacket that he wore in the footage was never recovered. The rest of his clothing and his bank and credit cards are also missing. No one knows what Alan was doing in Purenporth that night, or how his body ended up in the water. In 2009, Stephen Kosher quit his job in Salt Lake City and moved to St. George, Utah. After months of struggling to find a job, Stephen left St. George on December 12, 2009. The following day, he called 2 of his friends and claimed that he was in Las Vegas. Stephen never offered any explanation for his trip, but his family believes that he may have been looking for a job. These phone calls were the last time anyone ever heard from Stephen before he mysteriously vanished without a trace. His abandoned car was located in a residential neighborhood in Henderson, Nevada, with wrapped Christmas presents that Stephen had purchased for his family in the back of the vehicle. Investigators eventually found this video of Stephen taken on December 14, 2009, from a camera at a residence in the Henderson neighborhood. The video shows Stephen parking his car, crossing the street, walking down the sidewalk, and then disappearing out of sight. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. It's unknown why Steven parked his car in the upscale neighborhood, though it's been speculated that it could have been because it seemed like an unlikely place for him to become the victim of some kind of violent crime. His cell phone signal was picked up at various locations by a tower several miles away, but the signal died after 2 days. With his employment and financial difficulties, some people have speculated that Steven may have staged his disappearance to start a new life. However, there has been no trace of him for about 6 years. The following video is from a surveillance camera taken in November of 2007 in Fresno, California. It was positioned to record the owner's front lawn and was set up because someone had tried stealing something from the owner's yard on a previous occasion. On the night the video was caught, the owner was woken by his dogs barking in an unusual way. He got up and looked at his security monitor and saw the creatures, about 2 to 3 feet tall, moving across his lawn. He grabbed a camcorder and recorded the monitor screen. Local investigators presented the footage at a mutual UFO network conference. The video they shared also showed some footage of the owner and the front yard during the day. Since it's a video of a video, the quality isn't great. The TV show Fact or Faked investigated the video. The crew went to the home it was filmed at and tried recreating it with a few different experiments. In the end, they determined the video footage to be unexplainable. The end of the video also shows some footage of the creatures, that are by the way referred to as the Nightcrawlers, allegedly caught by someone else in Fresno a few years later. The TV show Paranormal Borderline received an anonymous letter in the mail providing enough information to warrant further investigation. It told the story of a worker who appeared to have been abducted by aliens. The letter was accompanied by a tape which allegedly shows the abduction. There are 4 black and white pictures. On the top right quadrants, a worker walks right to left through a gate. He disappears here in a flash of light at 11:16 p.m. The tape continued to run normally until almost 2 hours later. Then the victim reappears in a second flash of light in a fetal position. Then moments later, now crouching, he vomits and seconds later staggers right to left out of frame. According to the author of the letter, the footage was copied from a surveillance system. He reports that soon after the incident, the victim quit his job and moved away. Hired experts couldn't make any valid or concrete conclusions, and there are still no explanations for the flashes, missing time, or just what happened to the worker on that night. I was at home alone playing Call of Duty between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. During this time, I got a phone call from a random phone number, and of course, the first thing I think of is that it's just somebody who's either prank calling me or just doesn't have the right number. After I hung up, a few seconds later, I received a phone call from the same number. When this happened, I'll admit I felt a little chill run down my spine, but since I was home alone, I was thinking that if this person was just prank calling me, I could say whatever I want until either I or the person hangs up. So I answered it. I said hello in a sort of annoyed voice. but there was no response. Instead, all I heard was something that still freaks me out. I heard what sounded like a cat hissing, but in a much deeper pitch. Of course, out of surprise, I became defensively hostile. I said into the phone, "Look, buddy, if you call this number again, I'll have my friend who's a police officer track this number and arrest you." But this didn't even faze whoever was on the other end of the phone. Instead, all I got in response was disturbing low-pitched laughter. My heart dropped. "Why are you calling?" I said. Then, this is what still gives me nightmares to this day. As clear as day, in a dark, almost demonic voice, I heard, "I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs." Without hesitation, I ran out of the house and ran across the street to my friend's house and asked his dad to call my dad while trying to explain to him what happened at the same time. After he called my dad, my friend's dad called the police. They arrived in 5 minutes and found nothing upstairs, but they did find the back door open. My dad used to be a paramedic, and after he retired, he remained good friends with a lot of people, one of them being my godmother, Sally. Sally owned a bunny farm and was very friendly. My family and I loved her dearly, and my parents decided to make her my godmother, but she also had a brother named Terry. Terry was a very quiet man. He never said much and kinda had a weird vibe on him, but he was never around that much, so I didn't give it much thought. It was Thanksgiving, and we all decided to eat together. It was a great dinner, but his presence just really made me uncomfortable. While they were over, my godmother and I were working on the computer my parents used, and I noticed my brother and Terry were in the family room. I went out to see them just watching TV. Nothing was going on. The next day, we all went to church, and Terry asked me if my brother had a Facebook account. I said no, because that was the truth. My brother wasn't into social media, but my thoughts began to wonder why he wanted to befriend my younger brother. At some point he added me on Facebook, and I noticed that his avatar was that anonymous figure. Weird. Why didn't he have his face on his account? I got an instant message from him. The chat went like this. "Hey there," he said. "Hi. What are you doing up so late?" "I'm a night owl, so I'm usually up late." "Doesn't that make your parents mad?" he said. They don't mind," I said. "A naughty girl, aren't we? Staying up late. Would you like to chat?" "Actually, I gotta go now. I have homework," I said, quickly going invisible and closing him out. What the hell kind of chat was that? He was talking to me like I was some slut or something. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go to his account. He didn't have his friends list blocked, so I was able to see all his friends. What I saw and what I felt that night will always haunt me. He had over 200 friends, and all of them were young men between the ages of 14 to 18. I was so sick as I saw some of the boys were shirtless in their boxers or worse. It's not the fact that he's into men that freaked me out. No, I wouldn't care if he was gay. But this man was targeting young men. Terry was in his 40s. This is why he wanted to know if my brother had a Facebook account. He wanted to add him in his sick boy list. I was shaking as I realized what kind of man this was. I loved my godmother, but this was just sick. I told my parents and reported his account. My dad was shocked, but he also wasn't too surprised, because apparently Terry was reported for selling drugs to kids and touching them on the news one day. I found out the case was dropped because the boys said they were lying. But now I wonder, were they really lying? Since then, we stopped talking to my godmother and her sick brother. His Facebook account was taken down, but I know he's still out there targeting young men. I still have nightmares of him going after me and my brother. My parents recently bought a cabin in the woods and would always spend their weekends up there. My little sister would always go with them, so I spent a lot of time home alone over the weekends. One evening, I was bored out of my mind, so I plopped my butt down and played some Legend of Zelda. Now, over the years of living in this house, I developed some kind of natural reaction. Every now and again, whenever my parents needed me, they would call me from the top of the stairs, and for the record, my room was in the basement. Then I would pause the game or stop what I was doing and walk to the stairs and ask them what they needed, and it happened very often. So often, I keep an ear out for the faintest sound coming from upstairs. This one particular night, as I was playing Zelda, I heard someone call my name from upstairs.
Brandon?
With this natural instinct kicking in, I got up and walked toward the stairs. It wasn't until I was about halfway to the stairs did I remember that my parents were not home. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me or something. I returned back to the land of Hyrule until I heard my name called again.
Brandon?
This time, it was louder, and the voice wasn't my father's. In fact, it wasn't anyone from my family's voice. Maybe a neighbor's? But I know my neighbors well, and I didn't recognize the voice. I bolted upstairs to investigate, shouting for a response. I got none. I looked out the window in our dining room area that gave me a good view of our street. I live in a house at the far end of a cul-de-sac, so we can see every house on the street. Right before the street opens into the big circle of asphalt, there was a dim streetlight illuminating the street. Standing directly under the light was a dark and shadowy figure. I tried to see if I could recognize him, but I couldn't, until I realized something about the man that made my blood freeze in horror. The man had no shadow, and I know that because he was directly under a light source. His shadow would be beneath him, but no. I looked in between the legs. No shadow whatsoever. Suddenly, the streetlight flickered for a split second, and the shadow man disappeared. I then ran frantically around the house, making sure every door and window was locked and secured. I then locked myself in a closet beneath the staircase and played Pokemon on my DS for the rest of the night. I'll never forget the time me and my brother snuck out past our bedtimes to explore an allegedly haunted house down the block. Yes, I said bedtime, as I was only 10 and my brother Luke was only 12. When our parents said goodnight to us, I went to Luke's room and we took a couple hand-powered flashlights with us and hopped outside through the window. Luckily, his room was on the first floor. Those hand-powered flashlights worked by constantly pushing in a little trigger that would create light inside the lens. They were noisy as hell, but they were convenient. Once we were outside, we just walked down the block, and in 2 minutes we were there. It was rumored by all the neighborhood kids and teens that the place was haunted. Everything about it was creepy. The older, more antique design of the house, the isolation from the rest of the houses, and the broken windows and rotting wood. It seemed perfect for a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my curious and confident brother's idea. I was scared shitless. The door was locked, as expected. I felt a bit of relief, thinking we might just go home, but my brother made a shocking move next. He grabbed a plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. Eventually there was enough of an opening to unlock it and slide it up completely. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisy-ass flashlights. Immediately after entering the house, we both picked up on the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, which was odd as it was a September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti or anything anywhere. In fact, it was relatively empty besides a few pieces of furniture that were clearly not worth taking along. It seemed we were the first to enter the house, shockingly, or at least from the back. We went upstairs to the main floor from the little den area and continued cranking the flashlights. That's when we heard the slightest crack in the floorboards from right above us. We both jumped. I tugged for Luke to leave, but he told me the place is old as hell, it's just house noises. I stopped cranking the flashlight at this point, and I urged Luke to do the same, but he only called me stupid for suggesting something so ridiculous. Then there was another crack in the floorboards from above us. He began walking upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I was not about to stay down there alone. I followed behind him to the upstairs. There was a door that led to a room right above where we were standing. I begged him not to open it, but he must have just wanted to be the big, tough older brother. He began to reach for the doorknob while still cranking the noisy flashlight, but then he stopped. I was confused. I could see in the dark he was moving his ear up against the door, listening for something. Silence. Then, the most deafening, nightmare-inducing moment of my life. A single bang on the door from the other side sent my brother staggering into the wall in pain, covering his ear. We dropped the flashlights and ran straight out the back door and back home. We were so loud when we got back that our parents found us out. We told them what happened, but they naturally didn't care and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of something from outside my window and a glare of brightness sneaking in through my slightly opened blind. I sat up, and my heart sank when I realized it was the sound of the crank to my flashlight. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when it stopped. There was nothing but complete blackness out there after that. I woke the next day barely remembering what happened, and I still hope today that that part was just a dream. This is a story that happened to me recently. I was still in my first year of university, and I've only just made friends with a few other students. Albeit an old and notorious university for its ghostly figures and paranormal activity, the campus janitors and security were all too familiar with unusual reports. The art and design faculty was subjected to the oldest campus of the 4 separate buildings, and the block my class happened to progress in was the allegedly haunted section as well. It was late in the afternoon, just before 5, and my friend needed to use the restroom. She asked me to accompany her, and I obliged, seeing it as an opportunity to rest my eyes from the strains of the projector. She rushed into one of the stalls, and I waited outside the bathroom. Feeling that she would take longer than I initially anticipated, I decided to walk back to class without telling her. As soon as I sat down, she barged into the class, calling out for me. According to her claim, she heard the sink's tap turn on and thought it was me playing a prank. As she opened the door, she saw no one else in the restroom besides herself, yet the other stall next to her was locked from the inside. Thinking it was someone else on the toilet, she asked if it was me. No answer. Curious, she looked down the gap but saw no shoes or legs, yet heard feminine whispers and humming from that particular stall. Frightened, she left without saying another word. Class ended and we went home, but the thought of the occurrence remained. We later learned from one of the janitors that no one should ever be in the restroom after 5 in the evening, as there is a known ghost of a woman who resides in the stalls. Needless to say, as juniors in the university, my friends and I decided to never use the bathrooms after the designated time. I'm not in any way saying these claims are true, but everything I told you is true in regards to what I was told. Whether these things I was told by my friend and the janitor are true or not remains a mystery to me. This happened a few months ago while I was serving in Japan as a missionary for the Mormon Church. I was in the country for 2 years, and my time to return home was approaching. I was in my last area, Kyoto, a bustling tourist attraction, an ancient Japanese city I've wanted to visit all my life. Anyway, it was late at night, and my companion and I were knocking on doors to see if anyone had interest in learning about Christ. We came across this one apartment building and decided to give it a shot. In Japan, there are 3 kinds of apartments: super luxurious suites, decent apartments with 4 to 5 rooms total, or ghetto as crap. This apartment was the latter. We were on the 2nd floor of this building and knocked on this one door. A middle-aged man in worn-out clothes answered with an awkward smile on his face. Being the kind missionaries we were, we introduced ourselves and asked him if he would like to learn about what we believe. Instead of giving us a direct answer, he invited us in. Usually, in missionary work, this is a good sign, but upon stepping foot into that apartment, I knew what we got ourselves into. This apartment reeked with the smell of marijuana and urine. His apartment was puny, a small entryway, a door on the left leading into a bathroom, a small kitchen to the right, and a small multi-purpose room with a small kneeling table, TV, and bed. That's it. Judging by the way he was behaving and most of the decor in his apartment, I knew this guy definitely had some sins worth confessing. He sat us down on either side of the table and started to rant on about how he hates Christians and wants to kill them. That made my companion and I tense up a bit. But the man was plastered. In the time this was going on, he drank like 10 times his weight in booze. We just prayed and hoped he wouldn't recognize who we were and what he was telling us. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you a secret and you can't tell anyone." He then pulled out from under his bed a box. He opened it to reveal thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Japanese yen, and yes, it was authentic. We even examined it. This man was an illegal drug lord who worked with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia group. We then realized that if this man knew what he just did and showed us, he would kill us for sure, or at least take us hostage. My companion and I feared for our lives and tried to come up with an excuse to get away, but he wouldn't let us go. He kept ranting on about irrelevant things and saying how Christianity was an evil cult of some kind. We tried to explain our side of the story, but there's no use in reasoning with a drunk drug lord who works for the Japanese mafia. It then got to the point where we practically had to run for the door. We said we were leaving, stood up, and quickly walked over to the door. The guy then stood up and began to reach for something in a box, but we never saw what it was. As soon as the door closed, we bolted home, faster than we ever had. The last thing we wanted was him sobering up to find out he had revealed his deepest, darkest secrets to 2 Christian missionaries from America. Had this man not been drunk, he probably would have killed us. For all we know, he was reaching for a gun as we were leaving. When I was 15 years old, I was home alone one night for whatever reason. My bedroom was on the 1st floor, right next to the living room. It's a strange setup. I had the door shut and was playing video games when I heard a strange sound come out from in the living room. It took me a few moments to figure out that it was a tap on the window. I stepped through the dark living room and out the front door and checked the bushes by the window. Nobody was there. I went back to my room with the door open and resumed playing the game. 5 seconds later, another knock on the glass. This time I ran to the front door barefoot, ready to chase the pranksters, but again, no one was in the bushes. No one was even in sight. I chose to just ignore it from here on out. On my way back to my room, there was another knock. I ran over to the window to try and catch them. There wasn't anyone outside, but I felt something right above the tip of my toes. I looked down and saw the dark shadow of a figure sitting down by the window. I think I was back in my room in a matter of 2 seconds with the door locked. I was hiding under my bed trying to call my dad. The knocking on the glass continued from outside. When I explained to my dad, he called me crazy for not calling the police, so he told me he would for me and to wait in my room with the door locked. I'd say about 5 minutes later, the knocking stopped, and 10 minutes later, the cops arrived. The figure was gone, but there were no signs of entry or exit, as all the doors were locked and all the windows shut. Still, we haven't seen or heard of anything since then, but it's still creepy as hell to think about. Working as a pizza delivery boy, you'll run into a lot of strange things. However, this story may be an excessive example of that. I was 21 years old, and it was a late Friday night shift at John's Pizza, meaning I would be closing with my boss. It was about 9 o'clock, an hour before closing. My next delivery was to the Saugerties, the next town over. The drive wasn't too long, maybe 15 minutes. I was a bit confused. The map was taking me to an isolated road that seemed to lead to nothing. I drove down it anyway, and shortly realized it led to a house by the water. It seemed every light in the house was on. Upon getting closer, I could hear music blasting from inside the house, even with my window shut. Strangely, there were only 2 cars parked in front of the house, at least from what I could tell. It was a pretty wide open property. The front of the house faced the water, so the road, or driveway I suppose, curved around to the front by the water. As I walked up to the front door, I took more notice to the fact that the house was like brand new. I then rang the bell a few times since the music was so loud. I was caught completely off guard when 2 women opened the door, one blonde and one brunette, barely clothed. They had huge, flirty grins on their faces. The blonde woman grabbed the pizza while the brunette handed me a 20. I was about to ask where everyone was, but the brunette called me cute and asked me for my number. I thought I was about to get extremely lucky. After giving her my number, I was about to attempt at getting myself invited in, but the blonde immediately did that for me anyway. I entered the house and picked up on a rather unpleasant odor almost immediately, and there were literally no people anywhere, but I didn't care that much. The 2 women began to lead me upstairs, but unfortunately, this story did not go in the direction you may have hoped it would. I was literally on the 2nd step when a horrifying scream for help came from upstairs. I looked up there and then at the 2 women. They were looking at each other. The blonde one very clearly mouthed the word shit to the brunette. I didn't even really piece everything together at that moment, but I still just kind of instinctively knew to run. I must have looked back like 20 times before I was able to turn around the car and drive back down the long driveway. Looking back through the mirror, I shit you not, at each and every one of the windows in the house, there were heads peering out to me as I drove away. Of course, I called the police on my way back to work and told them to check the place out. They did, and some investigator guy called me back not even an hour later, telling me whoever was there abandoned the place, and that, in fact, it was a brand new, just-built vacant house for sale. It didn't surprise me much. There was no party going on there. That same night, I got a text saying, "We know where you work." That was enough to drive me to quit that job. Since I mentioned a possible victim upstairs to the police, they came to my house to ask a series of questions about the people. I have also had my number changed since then, as I want no possible links to this incident, and I want to live with peace of mind. So it was my last delivery of the night at Domino's Pizza to a house that was about 10 minutes away from the shop. There was a note on the door, which I read after ringing the bell. It said, "To Pizza Guy, please let yourself in and leave the pizza in the upstairs bedroom. Money will be on the bed." Immediately, red flags were springing up in my head all over. I actually called my boss and told him I didn't feel safe going in there, and he actually told me it would be best to just go inside. I tried to use my charm, as people say I have, to persuade my boss, but he was hell-bent on me not bringing back that pizza. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. It was an average-sized house with some furniture that seemed a bit aged. There was a small nightlight shaped like a candle on the wall, providing just enough light to see a bit into the living room and my way upstairs. There were no lights in any of the rooms up there, just another candle nightlight. More red flags going off in my head. I come to the end of the small hallway upstairs. There are 2 doors, one open, one shut. The open door leads into a dark room, which I had to guess was the bedroom. As you may imagine, I was shaking in my shoes, afraid for any sudden sounds or movements anywhere. I pushed the door open completely and pressed my hand against the wall looking for the light switch. Found it. I flicked it on. Nothing. The lights didn't seem to work in this room. I very slowly walked over to the center of the room until something cushiony stopped my leg. It was a bed. I placed the pizza on the bed and began to search for the money in the dark. Just then, I heard the faintest, quietest thing come from outside of the room. I lifted my head and then resumed searching even faster. I was hoping to God it was just some kind of old person living here and they were too sick or nervous or whatever to meet someone. I found the money. It felt like 2 bills. I hoped they were 10s. I put them in my pocket and left the room. I stopped outside the room and saw the door to the other room was open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier.
Your pizza's on the bed. Have a great day.
I myself could hear the shake in my voice. There was no kind of response. I started to lean into the dark room to maybe get a better view. Too dark. I reached my hand into the room and searched for a light switch, but something grabbed my arm with a painfully tight grip and tried pulling me into the room. I screamed and jabbed at the arm with my keys, finally breaking free and getting back to my car. Nothing chased me out, nobody followed my car. I told my boss about it, and even talked him into giving me a raise for making me go through that hell. He didn't want me to call the cops for whatever reason. It wasn't really on the top of my mind, but in hindsight, I guess it would have made sense to get the police to check that place out. Anyway, not everything was terrible. I did get my pay raised from $7.50 to $8.50. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his second day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I had a manual 1998 Ford Mustang, a gas guzzler, so I in no way wanted to beat that car around town delivering pizzas. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekdays, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally, there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get and regular pizza?" It was a huge production just getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a longer trip with a bigger tip. It took probably 10 minutes for me to get to the location. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them, and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The woman looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and then they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there trying not to stare at the scary-looking guy. who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were going to try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow, like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try and slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely. I didn't even go back to work that night. When Mario the chef texted me, I told him what happened, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That was it. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead. I'm ashamed to admit that my life at one point was so pathetic that I had to resort to using the men seeking women and one-night stand sections of Craigslist, specifically when I was 28. As you'd expect, most of the posts seemed fake or contained images of really fat, gross, or just undesirable women. That is, except for one. There was a posting with a picture of a cute brunette woman saying on the listing, female 26, looking for a quick hookup. No feelings, no relationships, just one night stand. The thing about this photo was that it wasn't a picture of some insanely smoking hot chick. It was just a normal, decent looking woman making the whole thing more realistic and believable. She left her number on the bottom. I texted her and immediately noticed that she had an iPhone since my iMessage sent a blue bubble. Within seconds, the little gray bubble with the 3 periods popped up, informing me that she was typing. She replied with, "Hi, I'm Jen, but you can call me Jenny." I started to kind of flirt around with her until she gave me her address. As I grabbed my car keys, I didn't know if I should feel excited or ashamed. Minutes later, I arrived to the relatively unlit dead-end block in a rather unappealing area. Second thoughts were popping up now. I shot her a text asking which house she was in. She responded 209, the last house by the dead end. I pulled up to the last house on the street, and sure enough, the little porch light revealed the number 209 stamped onto the house. I'm not gonna lie, it was a shitty-looking house. Tiny, single floor, tall grass, and whatnot. I was really doing this. I got out of my car and knocked on her door. There was no answer. Suddenly my phone vibrated. Jenny texted me, telling me to come around back. Why? I asked. The gray bubble indicating she was typing something popped up, then went away. I waited for her to type something, but she didn't. I was a desperate, pathetic man, so against my better judgment, I made my way over to the wooden gate and latched it open. I walked very slowly into the opening of the backyard and froze. I looked up at the windows of the dark house, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw someone staring down at me from one of the top windows. The moment they noticed me, they moved away, and the blinds closed. It must have been Jenny, I was thinking to myself. My phone vibrated. She texted me saying, "I'll be right out, just brushing up." I was shaking now. I don't know if it was because I was nervous about hooking up with a woman for the first time in over a year, or if I was nervous about the weirdness of the situation. I could swear I suddenly heard a stick or something crack from further in the yard. Curiously, I flipped on the flashlight on my iPhone and aimed it over to that corner of the yard. My heart must have flat out stopped for a few moments when I saw what I could swear was an arm moving behind the wooden shed in the corner. I turned off the flashlight and somehow silently left the yard and got back in my car. Before I could shut the door, I heard a window from the house slam open, and a deranged, lunatic-sounding woman who I couldn't see screamed, "Wait, don't go." When I was pulling away from the house, the front door opened, and I heard a loud pop sound. I floored it away from there, and about 5 blocks up, I pulled over and realized I had a flat. They had shot my tire. I tried to get the car as far away from this town as possible before calling roadside service to set up my spare tire. The repair guy found the bullets still in the flat tire. He believed my story and did me a favor of vouching for me in front of a cop. There were 3 people who were arrested, 1 filthy-looking woman and 2 redneck-looking men. They stood trial and were found guilty of God knows what, I don't remember. It's funny. They were too stupid to even evacuate the house after pulling something like that. My mother and stepdad are ranchers. They got a new work truck and put the old one up for sale. A lady from another rural area about 4 hours away was super interested, but gave numerous reasons why she could not even drive halfway to get the truck. My stepdad is nice to a fault, so he convinced my mother to follow in a second vehicle that Saturday so he could drive the truck there. My mom's no fool, and this lady was already making her suspicious. Well, her feelings weren't helped when we arrived and the lady gave a convoluted story about bank problems and presented a post-dated check. She also begged my stepdad to leave the plates in his name. My mom excused herself, grabbed my stepdad, and had a heated argument about taking the check and the plates. She won on canceling the plates, but she lost on the check. So they drove another 4 hours home, and as anyone not my stepdad guessed, the check bounced when it came to the date it was written. The woman dodged phone calls for a while, eventually answering and giving another convoluted story about being in the hospital and on and on. My stepdad for once stood his ground and told her they'd be taking back the truck. So they drove another 4 hours there, this time with a flatbed in case parts were missing or something. No one answered the door at the property, and they found the truck in the shed and loaded it up. My stepdad had tried to keep my mom from saying what was on her mind, but while he was busy securing the load, she wrote something to the effect of, "Thanks for nothing, hope you enjoyed fucking us around," and slipped it under the door. 15 minutes later, as they're driving home, the cell phone rings, and the lady who was supposedly hospitalized was on the line. She said she knows exactly where they lived and that they made a huge mistake. 2 days later, my stepdad awoke to someone climbing into the house through his bedroom window. I heard my mother's screams all the way from my bedroom, which was one of the most chilling moments of my life. It was the crazed woman breaking in, armed with a knife. I don't know how, but my stepdad managed to take her down even while she was armed. The whole story was shared with police, and then the woman was taken away. I guess karma is a pretty amazing thing. This story took place a long time ago, back in 2002, when Craigslist was in its early years. Many wouldn't know, but back in those days, Craigslist was a lot different. It was a lot more so an online garage sale, or just a place where people would list old things that still had some value that they were willing to give away. I got a basketball hoop, a hockey net, and a spoiler for my car, all free in perfect condition in that same year. You'd be lucky if you found something like that these days. Anyway, me and my son were dying to buy a hockey net so we could practice in the cul-de-sac we lived in. For the record, this was before I got that free one I mentioned. Wouldn't you know it, on Craigslist there was an ad for a slightly used regulation-size hockey goal for only $50. It came with a puck and 2 slightly used hockey sticks. I still have a picture of that ad to this day. It seemed like the perfect deal, but he lived about 2 hours away. I called the number he had listed, and he sounded pretty normal on the phone. He had a pretty deep, dark voice, but nothing that would be off-putting. I remember his voice being a bit emotionless. He agreed to meet halfway due to the distance, said he'd put the stuff in the back of his pickup truck. He said he could only come after he got off from work though, which was much later in the day, way past dark. We agreed to meet at some rest stop off the highway. Me and my son, who was 11 at the time, took my wife's minivan, the only car that would be able to fit that huge thing. Within an hour, we were at the truck stop, which was empty at this hour, but was decently lit by 3 big light posts. I parked right under one of the lights and waited. A pickup truck pulled in off the highway right on time. He stopped right in front of me. I went over to his window, but then noticed there was nothing in the back of his truck. "You Steve?" he asked me. "Yep, that's me," I said. "Alright, my buddy's bringing in the stuff with his truck." The guy pulled up behind my car and put it in park. I suddenly had a bad feeling. I told my son to get back in the car and lock every door except mine. 2 more pairs of headlights came off the highway into the lots, surely enough pulling up next to me. And, not surprisingly at this point, there was no hockey equipment in either one of them. My heart was racing. I was worried. Not for me, but for my young son who I for some reason brought with me on this trip. A group of large men mixed with heavy-set and muscular physiques stepped out of the 2 pickup trucks behind the first one. They eyed me from head to toe, giving that typical intimidation stare down. Then this bald guy wearing sunglasses said in a deep voice, "Where's the money?" I instantly pulled out my wallet and handed it to him, begging him to just let me and my son go. He pulled out like $100 and was pissed, expecting more. He then sent 2 of his goons or whatever to get my son. At this point, I screamed and begged for him not to take him. One of the men broke the glass to the minivan back door, and I vividly remember the disturbing, heartbreaking screams of my young son. What happened next was what I can only explain to be a miracle from God answering my prayers. A car was entering the lot from off the highway. All the men stopped and turned to look at it. As it got closer, my heart literally dropped in excitement as I saw it was a police car. The lights suddenly began to flash as he got close enough to see what was going on. All of the men were back in their trucks within seconds, speeding off down the highway. Well, at least 2 of them. The truck in the back was caught immediately by the police car, and backup arrived shortly. I explained everything to them, and they got the men that were caught to rat out on the others surprisingly quickly. I guess luckily the guys in the back truck weren't very loyal to whoever their leader was, if they even had any type of leader. Believe it or not, I had a police escort all the way home to make me and my son feel safer. I don't want to get into all the legal stuff, but I'll just say that all of those men except for one was caught, and I'm pretty sure that was the driver of the first pickup truck. Needless to say, my Craigslist days weren't over at that point, but I have always been much more protective of my son and much more cautious of Craigslist meetings since then.